Greetings, marvelous folks! In today's episode, we revisit mankind's primordial fascination with lycanthropy and therianthropy in particular. Therianthropy as a fad is as old as time itself, spanning millennia. It refers to the phenomenon of transformation into animals or creatures under the influence of curses or spells, or owing to hideous mutations that we're unaware of. Ever since we evolved from herders and shepherds to architects of grandiose marvels, we've charted paths through perilous cascades and treacherous terrains, places where even the wispiest hues of familiar specks or stray glints of the harshest sun fail to take heed of. From these depths rise towering menaces, cloaked in furs of doom, with talons that cleanse the spirit and cleavers for fangs. Tales of these beings persist even today, spun by firelight in the warmth of January embers as children are lulled into sleep. Well, maybe not all of them qualify as cautionary tales meant to keep children from harm's way. Some are just too gore and animate, even for the tenacious of hearts. These are tales that have seeped their way into popular culture through popular fiction, burgeoning categories of horror movies that would go on to become cult classics that we've all sought refuge and found delight in. Well, before the geeking out oozes out of proportion, let's dive into our list for today. But before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. 1. True lycanthropes. So first, we'll take a look at a catalog of true lycanthropes. These are lycanthropes that are natural-born or infected lycanthropes capable of transmitting their condition to others. Their transformations typically involve predatory animals. Werewolves. Lycanthropy has long been deemed a supernatural ailment or a disease, with sources across history suggesting that the earliest records go back as far as 1150 to 1228. In traditions of folklore and myths, we see that werewolves possess the ability to shapeshift into a wolf-like creature, either at will or under the influence of geocosmological interferences and occurrences that hold the key to abominable sights, characterized by transformations that would have you reach into your pocket for a liqueur mini before brandishing your rifle at the overarching beast. As legends would often have it, the transformation would usually occur under cover of darkness on a full moon, when the victim is at their most vulnerable, relinquishing control over baser impulses and instincts that we wouldn't dare imagine slipping our minds. The general consensus in every account favors the notion that a bite from a werewolf, who is in a transitory phase, is undergoing a transformation from being a man to that of a werewolf, and the scar from the bite usually lasts lifelong. However, there are other ways lycanthropy may be induced among victims of a curse, or those born to a parent who is already a carrier of the affliction, being a victim in the first place. It's difficult to ascertain the exact origins of when and where the tales emerged from. However, some scholars have opined that the werewolf actually makes its debut in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the most ancient of sources. The first epic known to humankind, found in written form, which also happens to be the source for the oldest known narrative of the Wolfman when Gilgamesh abandoned a potential lover due to her previous history of transforming her mate into a literal wolf. The trope of werewolf is also found to be a feature in Greek mythology, as seen in the legend of Lycaon. In this myth, a man and his son were transformed into wolves as Zeus unleashed his wrath upon them upon being enraged. In the scope of traditional mythology, there have been many variants of the Wolfman folktales whereby, in most of the accounts, there was an association with witchcraft as a common denominator to have induced the occurrence of werewolves. Two of the most common ways this would be achieved would be through a curse from a witch or an infection, similar to what we've seen in the medieval era, as witches would be hunted, gathered, and burnt at the stake. There were actual trials being conducted for werewolves that emerged in what is now the present-day Switzerland. This began in the 15th century and peaked in the 17th. spreading like an epidemic across vast swathes of Europe before fading away as late as the 18th century. Most of the tales of sightings and legends of the werewolf would come about during this span. Through the years, the creatures have found a staple in populaces, in the remotest provinces, across all of Europe and beyond. The most often described description paints a picture of a humanoid creature with lupine attributes, with hair all over the body, pointed ears, a piercing gaze, a canine muzzle, and a pair pair of ragged claws on both hands and feet. They're capable of moving on either two legs or on all fours with little resistance or hindrance, compromising their mobility. The process of transformation, as portrayed in films, is usually characterized by localized pains or swellings that cause deep-seated traumas in individuals. The resulting lupine that we get is prone to a compunction that leads them astray, often at dire straits, whereby they face moral turpitude wherein they are torn apart by conflicting psyches, eating away at their soul. Weretigers. In the Asian heartlands, we come across renderings of a local myth about a creature that is part man, part tiger. In India, the Weretigers are typically described as menacing sorcerers who, to serve their baser schemes, would employ cruel ploys to ransack the livestock of the locals in the village. These Weretigers are, without qualms, utterly ruthless, who wouldn't so much as budge whilst preying on humans and turn to man-eating. Their lore has traveled through the rest of India and into Persia through travelers who encountered the royal Bengal tigers of India in the mangroves of the Sundarbans and then further east. The Chinese legends often describe weretigers as the victims of a curse that runs within a clan or a bloodline, and thereafter a ghost who has become spiteful and vindictive. Ancient teachings in China held the belief that nearly every race, except for that of the Huns, was considered to be some sort of creature or animal in disguise. And so shapeshifting was quite commonplace in the Chinese ethos and imagination, so they would rarely assign shapeshifting to some sort of magnificence or extraordinarily otherworldly thing. Conversely, if ghosts of those killed had met their fate by a tiger while drawing their last breath, they would become malevolent, supernatural beings, also known as Chang, harnessing all their energy to ensure that tigers preyed on more humans. Some of these ghosts were also responsible for transforming ordinary humans into man-eating weretigers. Also, in Japanese folklore, we find similar anecdotes of creatures called bakaniko that are similar to kitsune, a class of fox spirits, and tanukis, or raccoon dogs. In Thailand, it's believed that a tiger that eats many humans may become a weretiger. However, there can also be sorcerers who are highly adept and can take on the form of many different animals. In Southeast Asian countries like Indonesia and Malaysia, we find similar parallels to the Tiger Man myth as well, where the power of transformation is regarded as a passing down of a curse or an ailment that runs in the family, and is thus mostly believed to be inherited, owing to the use of arcane incantations, verses, hymns, and charms. They're not usually hostile to men and thus don't forebode ill omens or harm except in instances when they are hungry or are motivated by vengeance. Along the lines of the werewolves, they too are believed to assume the form of tigers only at night. However, they have a specific agenda in place, such as flock guardians to protect plantations from wild pigs and ravaging. Variations of the belief are, of course, prominent, with some asserting that the shapeshifter does not recognize their friends unless their aliases or names invoke them, or when they go out as a mendicant who transforms to swear revenge on those who would refuse alms to the creature. The indigenous tribal community of Khans in India shares a similar disposition. For them, the tiger is friendly and reserves his wrath solely for their enemies. Werebears. A werebear, or berserker, meaning bare-skinned or bare-cloaked in Old Norse, are lycanthropes who exhibit traits or features akin to those of a bear. The Werebears of San Diego do not have a clan. Among every existing form of lycanthropy, bear lycanthropy is considered the least effective, and therefore the rarest of strains, as well to take course among humans. Like any other lycanthropy, its onset in the victim can also be attributed to a sort of supernatural strain of virulence that allows the host to access the immensity of strength and an array of other associated functionalities and abilities alongside the appearance of a specific species of animal, which in this scenario happens to be a bear. Therefore, werebears are among those lycanthropes that are carriers of a specific kind of strain of lycanthropy that induces or heightens bear-like reflexes, instincts, and features. This can be passed on via bite or even a clawing wound given while the werebear is still in his werebear or hybrid form, or through an exchange of blood, a trope as old as time, a trope that continues to be a favorite from a coterie of some of our favorite superheroes. The disease can also be contracted as you ordinarily would with any bacterial or viral infection, through vaccines contaminated in the blood or fluid of a werebear. It was far more common than people think it was, but it's said that advances in the field of medicine have significantly reduced the likelihood of it occurring as frequently as it did in the olden days. Moreover, we haven't found any known cases of such developments among werebears. Most of the time, it's said that the host lives their entire lives oblivious to the strain that they're bearing in their genome and pass it down to their children. It's rare for a werebear mother to carry a baby to term, as changing shape almost always makes for terrible miscarriages, a susceptibility that almost can never be thwarted. It's believed that the werebear father can pass on Mowgli syndrome to the child if he had tapped into his bear or hybrid form while engaging in intercourse. Once they've turned, the lycanthropes become immune to every other strain of lycanthropy, keeping aside 30 or so, of which only 4 are said to exist in the United States, including vampirism as well, with the remarkable exception of the line of hybrids, again, who were created by the mother of all darkness. As with every other lycanthropy, the werebears also possess incredible strength and speed far beyond human limitations. They can bench press a literal car and can move at a pace faster than our eyes can construe a trajectory of motion. This is another reason why they have an insatiable appetite as well, far surpassing that of an average human, owing to exceedingly higher rates of metabolism as opposed to an ordinary human, which is why they ought to consume more calories too to keep up. Their body temperature is higher than an average human. It's also said that cold temperatures and ice baths can prove to be fatal for them when they're in recovery or are healing, which, on the other hand, can be beneficial for humans to treat fever. Werebears are highly territorial and live in sleuths around urban centers. The rules for the clan vary based on who's in charge at any given time. The sleuths are highly organized in a strict hierarchy of dominance, usually determined by strength and power. Werehyenas. Among several tribal groups and ethnicities residing in mainland Africa, the tale of a monstrous creature that was born out of fear and loathing for a vicious predator found across the terrains of the continent. The hyenas. Folklore galore, as curious tales of supernatural creatures keep resurfacing among local populaces, specifically of those that resemble hyenas. These are beings that are morally bankrupt and possess numerous abilities that they resort to and exploit and inflict harm upon their human foes. Their stories bear a stark parallel to the skinwalkers of the Native American folklore, except that, contrary to most lycanthropes, the werehyena do not always have to be in the form of a human. In fact, it's the other way around with these creatures as opposed to the accounts that we have of lycanthropy. Some tribes hold the belief with utmost conviction that hyenas can take human form at will. According to a legend, there lived a werehyena that was capable of assuming 3 primary forms: of a human, that of a large hyena, or a hybrid of the 2 species. They can either operate alone or in packs, and have an affinity for calling people out by their names at night in an attempt to lure them away from the safety of their community. If a victim should ever take the bait and fall prey to their cruel ploys, the werehyenas would bare their fangs and claws and pounce to ravage their bodies to feed on them. Evil magicians and witches often had to face the brunt of such tales, as they would normally be held accountable for such deeds. The Africans are also quite superstitious, and would often blame blacksmiths for those alleged attacks by the werehyenas, for many believed that it was they who were more prone to becoming such hideous creatures. Werehyenas were, without a doubt, a product of superstitions, informed by misplaced fear and imagination, which developed as a fad for the collective across tribes and villages to caution against such treacherous beings, or as stories to inspire fear among people, to control and redirect the flow of resources. We can't say for certain what it was, but we do know that the werehyenas were devoid of inhibitions or the usual restrictions in transformation that applied to werewolves. They could appear and manifest during any hour of the day, but they preferred keeping a low profile, so they preferred to raid during the night. When they weren't involved in stalking human prey, they would engage in other forms of depravity and offenses, often as pranks, to simply indulge their whims, which would include robbing graves, cannibalism, raiding villages, and destroying plantations or crops. Werehyenas were indeed a result of a superstitious fear of wild animals, coupled with prejudice against certain groups of outsiders like the Jewish, who would often be involved in the professions associated with welding and forging. However, interestingly, it can also be because of the presence of certain cults who would deliberately dress up like hyenas and imitate the animals to further their pursuits by inspiring fear and awe among locals. The idea of the werehyena was also explored in the Buffy episode The Pack, where hyena spirits would possess Xander Harris and a gang of thugs. This pack would then devolve into predatory monsters, and all of them became cannibalistic. The primal cult that Dr. Weirich was affiliated with was likely to be inspired by actual African hyena cults. The iconography of the werehyena is featured in the high-octane action fantasy in the characters of gnolls, who are depicted as humanoid hyenas. Werelions. These species of were creatures are not archetypal iconographs from folk myths and similar iterations, but are from the active imagination of an individual who authored a work of popular fantasy fiction series. We're talking about The Were Creatures by Curtis Jobling. It's in his works that we come across a species of humanoid lions. They're a type of werecat who can transform into a lion. In the jungle continent of Bast, the Lion Lords rule over the headquarters of the Forum of Elders called Leos. These werecats were part of a constituency that was comprised of leading members in the Forum, alongside the Weretigers of Felos and the Werepanthers of Braga, until Drew Farron dissolved the Forum. In the chain of command, the Lions have been at the helm, enjoying a fairly dominant position. They've had command over the Red Cloaks and an army of warriors bearing silver swords, clad in cloaks of coral red, that ward all over the continents of Bast and Lycia in the name of the Lion. They have the ability to oscillate between human and lion form back and forth. Their transformations were not merely characterized by a mere change in appearance, but involved a thorough and profound alteration in their physical and metaphysical attributes as well. Transformations are often accompanied by a surge in mystical energy or a ritualistic process that enmeshes their physical form with their innermost essence or the crux of their being. When they're in their human form, they retain their intelligence, strategic awareness, and dexterity, allowing them to interact with the world in ways that are otherwise impossible for them to avail of when they're still in their animalistic state. When they tap into their primal and animalistic impulses in their lion form, they possess uninhibited power agility with heightened sensory abilities that are reminiscent of the highest class of predators who scour the food chain in the animal kingdom. Their most defining trait is their strength. This strength doesn't just reinforce the idea of brutish strength, but refers to something extraordinary that's welded in their physiological build, making way for supreme and towering feats exhibiting sparks of angelic or divine prowess. Wereboars. Next up, we've got the Wereboars from the world of legends. They're not the usual shape-changing kind. They take after their ability to stand on their hind legs. They feature as a rare shape-changing humanoid condemned to inhabit the Forgotten Realms. Upon transformation, they turn into gargantuan beasts with features that are analogous to that of a gigantic beast if it were magnified twice as much. These solitary creatures prefer living in remote camps or homesteads that are a far cry from the reach of urban or cosmopolitan centers, sprawling with lives and brimming with activities. They can nonetheless be quite volatile and are not to be stifled with, as they can pose a great threat when provoked. Their tales are believed to be tall tales and hoaxes spun by wayfaring troubadours and travelers, but the Wereboars are considered very real among people who claim to witness them before their very eyes. As described in the book of Navarre et la Moira, Eyes of the Wilds Book 2, there dwell many creatures in the forests along the slopes of the Kereg Mountains, wherein Wereboars in particular have a reputation for being one of the dangerous residents. As the name suggests, Wereboars are related to the regular boars that can be found normally in Brayfeld and Delvheim, but the two can be easily set apart from their cousins based solely on their contrasting sizes. Wereboars are way bigger in comparison and are usually spotted walking on their hind legs. They have incredible resilience and are quite strong. Despite being omnivores, they would prefer meat over other options. They usually hunt big herbivores, such as deer, that are readily available in mountainous forests. While hunting, they usually leap on all fours and are quite agile and faster that way. Although they're known to predate on humans, They do have a tendency to attack careless humans. One of the most pertinent signs that you're in the territory is the scratch marks on the bark of the trees. Despite posing a threat, these Wereboars can be prized possessions as their fur holds antiquated value, and they're a highly sought-after item that many town chiefs could be spotted having on them around their shoulders. 2. Induced lycanthropes. These are lycanthropes that have gained their abilities through magical items or rituals rather than natural means. They cannot, however, transmit their condition to others. Werefoxes. So now for our list, we have the skinwalkers of Eastern folklore, but it's not exactly uncommon in the myths of other lands. It is so stereotypically the prime shapeshifter of the East that the Japanese word for fox, kitsune, has greater scope and meaning as the concept is now applied across the world. Werefoxes are fairly common in the spiritual subculture of therianthropy. As a matter of fact, they're more common than other lycanthropes like werewolves. Thus, werefoxes and foxes have enjoyed a pretty strong interest in spiritual therianthropy. It's interesting to observe that foxes are probably the #1 animal in the subculture, so this is another area of major intersection for the two communities. Werecats. A werecat is an analog to a werewolf for a feline therianthropic creature, or lycanthropy. Lycanthropy comes from the Greek root word aileros, which means cat, and anthropos, which means human and refers to human or feline transformations, or to other beings that infuse feline with human traits. The root word colors, which is also used in ailurophilia, is the most common term for a deep love of cats. Lycanthrope is not exactly a commonly used term, but it refers to a feline therianthrope. Depending on the variation of events and inconsistencies in different retellings, the species involved can be a domestic cat, tiger, lion, lynx, or any other type, including some that are purely felines whose origins lie in mythology. European folklore usually portrays werecats as a species of people who can transform into domestic or house cats at will. Some European werecats would become giant domestic cats or panthers. They're generally considered witches, even though they have no such abilities to manipulate matter or transform into other beings. It's said that during the witch trials, all shapeshifters, including werewolves, were considered witches, whether they were male or female. In Africa, there are folks that speak of the Nunda, or the Ungwa, a giant cat who is immensely big and lurks in the darkness, prowling across villages at night. Many of these tales suggest that as predators, they are twice as terrifying in terms of ferocity. Some are of the opinion that the Nunda is believed to be a variation of therianthrope that by day is a human, but as the night dawns near, it becomes the werecat. However, there's no concrete evidence in favor of such creatures in documented texts. However, in 1938, a British administrator named William Hitchens, who was working in Tanzania, was informed by locals that a monstrous cat had been attacking people at night. Huge paw prints were discovered to be much larger than any other species of big cat, but Hitchens dismissed the case, believing it more likely to be a lion with gigantism. In mainland Asia, werecats usually turn into tigers. Werehawks, or werefalcons. Werehawks are a type of were creature that appears in the Wereworld series. They are people who can assume forms of a falconine or hawk-like form. The Werehawks rule over Windfell in the mountainous realm of Lycia known as the Barebones. They are neighbors to the Werestags of Stormdale and the Werecrows of Riven. The Hawks are among the deadliest of misanthropes in Lycia, having served in the Wolf's army as scouts and bombardiers. The Hawks were crucial in the conquering of Azra during King Werger's campaign. Their power and loyalty to Werger brought upon them great suffering under the tyranny of King Leopold, as they refused to acknowledge the new king. Leopold made an example of their leader, Baron Griffin, by cutting off his wings with a silver blade and giving Windfell to the hawk who betrayed him. He then forbade any hawk-like philanthropy under the death penalty. After that, most hawk lords abandoned Windfell and lived like normal humans until Drew Farron called them back to Tor Raptor, the mountain shrine where all the leaders and artifacts of the hawk lords are kept. Under the leadership of Drew Farron, they called them back to Tor Raptor, the mountain shrine where all the leaders and artifacts of the hawk lords are kept. Under Drew, the Hawks took back their city from the villainous Skier and followed Werger. 3. Cursed lycanthropes. These lycanthropes are created through curses or spells, representing a tragic transformation into monstrous forms. Werewolves, cursed variant. We're already quite aware of how some werewolves are cursed rather than infected, doomed to transformation due to divine punishment or hexes. Over the course of history since the dawn of civilization, we've come across fascinating, albeit bone-chilling annals of people turning into abominable beasts of damnation. Wolves in particular. Is there some truth to this? Why would people even spin such far-fetched fantasies? Is the curse real? If so, do we still have these Lycans in our midst? These are some of the most obvious questions that have easily troubled the most fertile of minds and delighted the masses, who would regale over stories of such bestial lurkings. Now let us wind back history. We come across in the Old Testament and the literature on modern medicine records of the existence of people who were genuinely convinced that they could shapeshift into animals. The name lycanthropy, after all, is itself derived from the word lycaon, a curse, a form of psychiatric syndrome in which a person believes he or she can shapeshift into a wild or another animal. The delusion fell first on the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar. Despite repeated warnings from Daniel to avoid vanity and greed, he declared himself as the sole proprietor and the progenitor of his own fate. It is he who remains uncontested in the path he set to hedonistic indulgence. The king declared himself the author of his own fate and destiny despite Daniel's repeated warnings. He strongly believed that it was God who permitted him to wield such great strength and command. As God had intended, Nebuchadnezzar suffered what we call these days a meltdown, behaving and being treated as a beast until he came to know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men. Daniel 4:25. The form a werewolf usually takes is not of an ordinary wolf, but is often anthropomorphic or maybe even otherwise larger and more powerful than an ordinary wolf. Many modern werewolves are also supposedly immune to damage caused by ordinary weapons, showing vulnerability only to silver objects, like bullets or blades. It's said that the negative reaction to silver is sometimes so potent that even so much as a touch can cause burns on the skin of the werewolf. At present, most werewolf fiction definitely involves lycanthropy being either a hereditary condition or transmitted like a disease that has taken an even more parasympathetic turn in some cases. With the rise of environmentalism and other return to nature ideologies, the archetype of the werewolf has come to be viewed by some authors as a representation of humanity in alliance with the visceral and primal aspects of nature. Modern psychiatrists consider lycanthropy to be a rare form of schizophrenia. When patients with clinical lycanthropy think they are animals other than wolves, the nomenclature of these terms becomes subject to alterations. For instance, the case of Nebuchadnezzar's lycanthropy is also studied as boanthropy because he behaved in the way of a cow, which is a bovine animal. Victims usually adopt behaviors in accordance with their respective states of delusion, but they of course suffer no physical manifestations akin to those of a wolf or any other animal. It was also quite common for people who have an overabundance of hair in all the wrong places may, in some instances, be accused of lycanthropy. This rare disorder is also called hypertrichosis, which basically means a lot of hair. Most werewolves start as humans before being afflicted with the werewolf curse. This occurs when they are scratched or bitten by a werewolf in the process of transforming or already transformed. Once infected, they're left with a permanent scar. After a person is infected with the curse of the werewolf, some will transform at the very next full moon. On every full moon, the werewolf will transform harrowingly from their human selves to their lupine selves. It is apparently believed to have been triggered by the gravitational pull of the moon in a manner that causes sea tides to rise. Other werewolves have more control over their transformation, and though it can be quite painful, it gets easier with time. They get stronger every time they transform, but they are at their strongest on a full moon. In some early mythological sets of beliefs, some werewolves emerged due to cursed objects that granted the wearer or the user some dramatic shifting abilities, achieved through demonic dealings and exchanges. Some also reported an association with the consumption of rainwater from wolves' paw prints. Wererats. From the world of Dungeons & Dragons, we have a race of hostile, rat-like lycanthropic species that dwell in urban areas, often operating as thieves and assassins who have the ability to shapeshift into humans and giant rats. The Wererat's human form tends to be a slender, wiry frame, somewhat shorter than that of an average human. Their eyes are constantly darting around, and their buck teeth, along with their nose and mouth, may twitch if they're excited for some reason. Males often have ragged, thin mustaches. Their limbs are human-like, but their head, tail, and torso are built in the likeness of a rat. They often have a swarm of mice and rats following them, who are instinctively drawn to them. In all three forms, Wererats are seen relying on weapons for their attacks, often giving precedence to swords over short-range daggers. Anyone who gets bitten by them has a chance of becoming infected with the strain of their genetic virulence and becoming a wererat. They prefer elaborate ambushes, catching their enemies off guard by luring and trapping unsuspecting victims. Those who fall prey are robbed or held for ransom and are eventually devoured. They're often employed by human crime lords to work as spies and assassins. They're also a favorite type of minion and enforcer for the cranium rats. Werecrocodiles. The lore of Werecrocodiles owes its origin to Thai folklore, where the myth of the werecrocodile is more dominant and is more famous than any other tale of were-creatures. In the folktale Cry Thong, for instance, the protagonist, or the hero, defeats Chalowin the giant, who could take the form of a crocodile bearing the jaws of a diamond. It is believed that Chalowin barely had any weaknesses that could be exploited and was also quite adept in the use of spells and sorcery. In the multiplayer role-playing online game, we encounter this creature yet again, who's also referred to as Sebek Spawn. These lycanthropes boasted an animal form of a massive, awe-inspiring crocodile. They also have the ability to assume a hybrid form where they can retain the attributes and abilities of both man and crocodile to tap into the best of both worlds. The hybrid form is usually comprised of the head of a crocodile and that of a muscular human. These were powerful hunters who were greatly feared in many lands. These werecrocodiles are humans who are bound to a curse that they cannot break away from. Another theory is that they were infected with a disease that caused their transformation into savage beasts. In the beginning, the transformation usually takes place under a full moon, and the victim regains its human appearance the following morning. In the course of time, the transformation would usually last longer, and the full moon is no longer a necessary condition for the transformation. At a certain point, the beast would begin taking over more frequently. While they are quite strong and bulky, they can be quite clumsy and lose their agility when on land. They usually prefer warm and humid areas with larger deposits of water as their homesteads and are quite hostile to those who dare intrude. Even in their human forms, they are quite formidable and are seen wielding a khopesh sword or a light crossbow, whereas in their crocodile forms, they would rely on their teeth and powerful jaws and weaponize their lashing tails if need be. Werecrocodiles like to ambush their prey either by getting close into their humanoid form or by awaiting submerged underwater for the most opportune moment to strike and claim their prize. They could not breathe underwater, but could hold their breaths for incredibly long hours. They can often manipulate their opponent's sympathies by toying with them, usually by pretending to be frail or would appear grief-stricken. Werecrocodiles could regenerate or heal from injuries, although this process would get disrupted if they had been hit by weapons made from silver. They find silver unpleasant, as it makes them significantly vulnerable. Marvelous verdict. The lore surrounding creatures and lycanthropy is a tale as old as time. It is a tale in which we unearth grotesque yet phantasmagoric insights that speak to us of the depths of human misery, guilt, and carnal rage. At its core, Lycans are about a man's struggle with the animalistic and the primal. Be that as it may, there can be no two ways about the place. The myth of the werewolf holds in our hearts and our consciousness. It's a symbol and an icon that generations have come to admire and embrace to explore their creative wits, to leave behind legacies in popular fiction, films, and games that will serve to amuse and provoke generations to revisit the legends of the humanoid creatures who stalked the minds of our ancestors. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.